Right now, as you sit with this, somewhere above you a world hangs in the sky that is almost the exact size of Earth. Same rock, same iron core, born from the same slow cloud of dust that made the ground beneath you. And if you were set down on its surface this instant, you would be dead before you finished a single breath. Not from the distance. Venus sits closer to the sun than we do, but that is not what kills you. Not from radiation, that is not it either. Not even from the absence of air, because Venus has plenty of atmosphere, far more than Earth does. What kills you is something stranger, and slower to explain than you would expect. Here is what most people get wrong about this planet. They call it Earth's twin, and by size that is almost true. But the surface underneath those thick yellow clouds sits at 465 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt lead, and it presses down with 92 times the weight of our own air, like standing on the ocean floor 1,000 meters below the waves. Except there is no ocean here, only sky. Let those two numbers sit for a moment. The heat first. 465 degrees is not a temperature a body argues with. It is hotter than any oven in any kitchen you have ever stood in. Hot enough that lead would soften and pool into a silver puddle at your feet. And it is not a daytime figure that cools when the sun goes down. It stays that hot through the long night, at the poles, at the equator, everywhere, all the time. Then the pressure. 92 times the air you are breathing right now works out to something close to 1,300 pounds pushing on every square inch of you. Picture a small car balanced on a single thumbnail. Now picture that same weight resting on every patch of your skin, the size of a thumbnail, all at once. That is not weather. That is the ocean, without the water. In 1970, a Soviet lander called Venera 7 became the first machine from Earth to touch that ground and live long enough to speak back to us. It lasted 23 minutes. Its voice came home so faint that no one heard it at first. The signal was found weeks later, buried in the hiss on the recording tapes, a thin thread of data from a world that had already crushed the thing that sent it. We are going to sit with why. 23 minutes. We are going to sit with everything those 23 minutes cost, and over the next couple of hours, that is the shape of where we are going, slowly, in no hurry at all. First to the handful of machines we lowered into that furnace, and how quickly each of them died. Then to the reason the heat is there at all, which is not the reason you might guess. Then, gently, to your own body, and exactly what would happen to it in the seconds after you arrived. What crushes first? What burns? What suffocates? And underneath all of it, the one quiet question this whole night circles. How long could anything, machine or flesh, really last on the surface of Venus? You do not have to remember any of it. None of these numbers are yours to carry. Let them pass through you like weather through an open window. If slow journeys like this into the dark are something you would like more of, you can follow gravity of sleep, and on another night, another world will be waiting for you here. But for now there is only this one. So get comfortable, wherever you happen to be lying. Let the phone go loose in your hand. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Let the weight of your own body settle down into whatever holds you. And let your breathing slow to something long and even. There is nowhere to be tonight but here. Let's begin. So we begin where almost everyone begins with this world, which is by mistaking it for a friend. From far enough away, Venus gives almost nothing away. It is the near neighbour, the next world in from our own. And for a very long time, the most natural thing imaginable was to look toward it and see a sister. Not a rival, not a warning, a sister. And the reason for that is written into its measurements, which are to a strange and almost uncomfortable degree, our own. Consider the size of it. Venus is about 12,100 kilometers across. Earth, the ground somewhere beneath you right now, is about 12,750. That is a difference of only around 5%. Set the two worlds beside each other, and you would struggle to say which was which. Venus is very nearly the same width as the planet you were born on, very nearly the same mass, very nearly the same pull holding things down onto it. If you could somehow stand there, your own body would weigh almost exactly what it weighs tonight. This is why the oldest word for Venus was twin. Not neighbor, not cousin, twin. A world that by every measure a person could take from a distance ought to have turned out something like home. And that is the first quiet trap of this whole story. Because sameness of size seemed to promise sameness of kind. It was a reasonable thing to believe, and it was completely wrong. Look a little closer, and the resemblance begins to come apart. And it comes apart first in the strangest possible place. It comes apart in time. Here a day is a simple thing. The world turns once, the sun crosses over, you sleep, you wake, and the whole cycle takes the 24 hours your body has always known. Venus does not do this. Venus turns so slowly that a single rotation, one full day, takes 243 of our days to finish. Let that number find its real size for a moment before it slips away. 243 Earth days, something close to 8 months of a human life, just for that world to turn around one single time. And here is the part that does not sit easily in a tired mind, so let it drift right past you if it wants to. Venus takes only about 225 days to travel the whole way around the Sun. That is its year, which means that on Venus, the day is longer than the year. One turn of the world outlasts a full journey around its star. Time itself is arranged wrong there, against every instinct you carry in your body, and it turns the wrong way. Almost every world in the Sun's family spins in the same shared direction, but Venus rotates backward, slowly, against the grain of everything around it. If you could stand on that surface and wait, and somehow survive the waiting, you would watch the sun rise in the west and set in the east, the reverse of every dawn you have ever seen, and you would wait a very long time to see it. From one sunrise to the next takes something close to 117 Earth days. Nearly 4 months of darkness, then nearly 4 months of light. No morning as you understand the word. No evening. Only a slow backward smear of a sun that needs a whole season to cross the sky. So already the twin is behaving like no twin at all. And it grows stranger still, because there is something missing from Venus that you carry with you everywhere and never once think about. Around the Earth there is a magnetic field. It is invisible, and it is made deep in the planet's molten heart, and it wraps the entire world in a shield that turns aside the constant wind of particles pouring off the sun. It is the reason a compass finds north. It is part of the reason there is anyone here at all to build a compass. Venus, a world nearly the same size as ours, very probably carrying a great core of iron much like our own, has no such field of its own, none made from within. All it has is a faint, borrowed magnetism, pressed onto it from the outside by the solar wind itself, laid over the top of its atmosphere like a thin cloth thrown over a table. And so that solar wind is not turned aside. It reaches down and strips at the very edge of the air, year upon year upon year, with nothing inside the planet to push it back. The same size, the same rough interior, and yet no shield, a backward spin, and a day that lasts longer than a year. The likeness was always only skin deep, and even the skin, as you are going to hear, is nothing anyone hoped for. But none of this, the slowness, the backwardness, the missing shield, none of it is what actually kills. These are the eccentricities of the twin, not its violence. And for a long time, that violence was only guessed at. It was inferred, argued over, estimated from far away by people squinting at a bright point of light through a haze they simply could not see past. The truth of what weighted down on that surface was not known. It could not be known. Not from here, not through a telescope, not until something went there in person and touched it and reported back in the last seconds before it was destroyed. And this is the moment the story quietly stops being about astronomers and starts being about machines. Small, doomed machines, built by human hands and flung across the enormous gap between two worlds for one specific purpose, which was to fall into that atmosphere and be killed by it, deliberately, in exchange for a few minutes of numbers. You can let that idea settle softly, without any weight. There is nothing you need to do with it. But hold, gently, the strangeness of it, that everything about to be described, everything now known about the surface of Venus, was paid for one dying transmission at a time. The first of those machines to truly succeed did so on the 15th of December in the year 1970. Its name was Venera 7. It was Soviet-built, part of a long and stubborn campaign aimed at this one particular world, and it became the first object ever made by human beings to come down softly onto the surface of another planet and live long enough to say something from it. Others before it had crashed. Others had fallen silent on the way down, crushed or cooked somewhere in the descent, before they ever reached solid ground. This one made it all the way. It came to rest on the surface of Venus, and it began to transmit. And then, almost at once, it began to die. It lasted about 23 minutes. That is the whole of it. Around 23 minutes, less time than it takes to fall asleep on a difficult night. And then the voice of it was gone. But here is the detail that stays with a person long after the number does. The signal it sent home was so faint, so thin, so buried under the noise of all that distance, that at the time no one was even certain it had worked. The reading from the surface was very nearly lost completely. It was only weeks afterward, when someone went patiently back through the recorded tapes and listened again, down into the hiss, that they found it. A single thread of measurement hidden inside the static. And that thread was carrying a number. The temperature where Venera 7 had come to rest was somewhere around 475 degrees Celsius. Give or take about 20. Read from the ground of another world, by a machine that survived less than half an hour in order to send it. 475 degrees. Hold it beside anything your body actually knows. It is far beyond the point where lead stops being solid and begins to run like water, a threshold that sits down around 327 degrees. It is hotter than the inside of any oven you have ever opened, at its very highest setting, and then hotter still. It is a heat that has no real meaning at the scale a human life is lived on. And it was not a fluke, not a hot spot, not bad luck in where the lander happened to fall. It was simply Venus, speaking for the first time in its own voice, telling us plainly what it was. Everything that had been guessed from a distance had just been answered from the ground. And the answer that came back was worse than any of the guesses. Worse, and it was only the first of them, because another machine was already being built, one meant to do something Venera 7 never could. One that would settle onto that same searing plane a few years later and, in the minutes before its own death, do the thing no human eye had ever managed from any other world. That machine was Venera 9, and on the 22nd of October, 1975, it did something that had never once been done in the entire history of our kind. Venera 7 had given us a voice, a single frail thread of data, pulled out of the noise weeks after almost everyone had assumed it had failed. It told us the temperature, and it told us the pressure, and then it was gone, but it could not show us anything. It was a blind hand reaching down into the dark and reporting back only what it felt. Venera 9 did not feel. Venera 9 looked. It settled onto the surface, and it opened what amounted to a single mechanical eye, and it began to send home a picture. Line by line, slowly, the way an old machine builds an image out of patience rather than speed. And when that picture had finished arriving, back on Earth, in a room full of people who had poured years of their lives into this one moment, they found themselves looking at the ground of another planet. Not a smear of light through a telescope, not a painting of a guess. The actual rock, the actual horizon of a world that was not this one. And it was a strange, quiet, unsettling thing to see. Flat, scattered stones, most of them no bigger than a dinner plate or a little larger, with edges still sharp, as though they had been broken only recently and never once worn down. There were no soft shapes, nothing rounded by wind or water the way stones are rounded here, and there were no shadows. The light did not fall from one bright point in the sky. It came from everywhere at once, filtered and spread through that impossibly thick air until the whole scene lay in a shadowless, even glow, the way a room looks under a heavy overcast, except this overcast was tens of kilometers deep. Venera 9 held on for 53 minutes. Then the heat and the pressure found their way inside it, the way they find their way inside everything, and it fell silent too. Let that settle for a moment. You do not need to hold on to the dates. You do not need to keep the names in their proper order. Just let the shape of the thing move through you. A small handful of machines, each one braver and blinder than the last, taking turns to fall onto a plane that kills them, and each buying us a few more minutes of truth before it goes. Because the next one bought us far more than minutes. On the 1st of March, 1982, a lander called Venera 13 came down through those same acid clouds and touched that same searing ground, and it did not die on schedule. It had been built to last perhaps half an hour. That was all its makers had dared to hope for. Instead, it lasted 127 minutes. A little over 2 hours. 2 hours of a machine sitting inside a furnace at 457 degrees and refusing, minute after minute, to stop working. And you should feel the weight it was sitting under, because the weight is its own kind of horror. Venera 13 was enduring a pressure about 89 times greater than the air resting so lightly on you right now. To find that pressure on Earth, you would have to go down into the ocean about 900 meters, more than half a mile straight down into black water, until the whole weight of that column was pressing in on you from every side. It is around 1,350 pounds bearing down on every single square inch. Picture the mass of a small car. Now picture that entire car balanced on one thumbnail, and hold that image against your own quiet hand there in the dark. That is what stood on every inch of Venera 13, the whole time it worked. And still, it worked. In those 2 hours it reached out a small drill, bored down into the surface of another world, and pulled a sample of that planet's soil up inside itself to be studied. Then it sent home the first photographs of the surface of Venus ever made in colour. And the colour when it came was not grey, and it was not the cold black of space. It was orange, a dim, sunset orange laid over everything, the ground and the stones and the flat far edge of the world, because the heavy air overhead strains out the blue light and lets only the long warm wavelengths sink all the way down to the floor. You are lying in your own dark room, and somewhere out there is a plane the colour of a banked fire, lit by a sun you would never quite be able to find. Now hold on to the last thing Venera 13 told us, because it is the piece that quietly folds this whole story open into something far larger than machines and dates. When they studied that drilled soil, the chemistry of it was familiar. It was not alien. It looked, more than anything, like basalt, the very same dark volcanic rock that makes the floor of our own oceans, the same stone that builds the black shores of Hawaii. If you have ever stood on cold lava and felt how hard and sharp it is under your feet, you have stood on something very close to the surface of Venus. That plane, 460 odd degrees, 90 times the pressure, wrapped in acid, is built from the most ordinary rock in the universe. A volcanic plane under an orange sky, made of the same material as an island you could fly to on a holiday. And that is the moment the number stops being a reading on an instrument and quietly becomes a place. A real place, with a floor you could name, that simply happens to be lethal in every direction at once. Here is the part that should sit heaviest of all, and it is not a new instrument or a new figure. It is a silence. Everything our species has ever directly touched of that surface, every temperature taken from the ground itself, every photograph, every crumb of drilled soil, came from that small handful of Soviet machines, across a span of only about 15 years. And then, it stopped. Since the middle of the 1980s, since around 1985, not one spacecraft from any nation on Earth has landed on Venus again. Not a single one. Everything you will ever be shown of that ground was gathered inside a brief window by landers that each died within minutes to a couple of hours. And then the door quietly closed, and it has stayed closed for longer than many of the people listening tonight have been alive. We have driven robots across the deserts of Mars for years at a time. We have flown past the very edge of the solar system, and the surface of our nearest neighbour, our near twin, remains a place we have visited for a grand total of a few hours, ever, and never once returned to. It is not that we forgot it, it is simply that it is that hard. But the plane itself did not go still while we looked away. In the 1990s, an orbiter named Magellan circled Venus and mapped it through the clouds with radar, tracing the shape of the land that no living eye could see. And then, decades later, in 2023, scientists went back to those old radar images, the ones taken only months apart, and they noticed something almost no one had thought to look for. A single volcanic vent on the flank of a mountain called Mart Mons had changed. Between one pass and the next, its shape and its size were different. Something had moved. Something had flowed. It was the first direct evidence anyone had ever found that Venus is not a finished, cold, sleeping world at all, but a place where volcanoes may still be erupting right now, in this very hour, while you lie here breathing slowly, pushing fresh rock up onto that orange plain in the dark. So watch how the number grew up in front of us. It began as a faint reading pulled out of tape noise. It became a shadowless photograph. It became colour and drilled soil and a floor made of ordinary lava. And it ended as a living, molten planet that we measured for a small handful of hours and then left entirely alone for 40 years. Each step made the one before it look small, look almost innocent, the way a childhood fear looks quaint once you finally understand what was truly standing in the room. And through every one of those steps, across every machine and every reading and every silent year, one single fact held perfectly, cruelly still, and not one of them could explain it. A world almost exactly the size of our own, built from the same familiar rock, had somehow become the hottest planet in the entire solar system, and every instrument that ever died down there died without ever telling us why. And yet the answer was never buried in the soil those landers drilled. It was never something the rock could be made to confess. The reason that world burns was not underneath the machines. It was above them, all around them, leaning on them, the whole time they worked. It was the air, not the distance to the sun, not some secret fire hoarded in the core, not a flaw in the stone. The thing that cooks Venus is the sky itself, and once you understand how the sky does it, you may never look at your own quiet ceiling in exactly the same way again. So begin with the fact that should be impossible. There is a planet that orbits closer to the sun than Venus does. Its name is Mercury, and it sits so near that star that at midday its surface climbs to around 430 degrees Celsius, a heat that would unmake a body in a heartbeat. Mercury is the nearest world to the furnace. By every simple instinct we carry, by everything your body already knows about standing closer to a fire, it ought to be the hottest place we have ever measured, and it is not. Venus, orbiting nearly twice as far out, catching less than a third of the sunlight that pours down on Mercury, is hotter, not by a small margin. Venus holds around 465 degrees, hotter than the planet pressed right up against the flame. Let that sit for a moment. The closer world is the cooler one. The farther world is the one that melts lead. The difference is not the sun. The difference is that Mercury is nearly naked. It has almost no atmosphere at all, only the thinnest trace of gas clinging to it, and a bare world cannot hold its heat. When the sun goes down on Mercury, the warmth simply leaves. It radiates straight out into space with nothing to catch it, and the night side plunges to something like -180 degrees. Mercury is scalding at noon and frozen by dark, a planet of violent extremes, because it has nothing wrapped around it to even the two out. It cannot keep what the sun gives it. It burns and then it forgets. Venus never forgets. Venus never cools. There is no relief when the long night comes, and the night there is very long indeed. The temperature at the equator and the temperature at the poles are nearly the same. The temperature in the blazing daylight and the temperature in the deep dark are nearly the same. 465 degrees, held steady, everywhere, always, as if the whole planet were a single oven with the door welded shut. Think of your own room, and the small mercy of nightfall, the way the heat of an afternoon finally loosens its grip once the sun is gone and you can breathe again. On Venus, that mercy does not exist. The dark is as hot as the light. The dawn brings nothing. There is no cool side of the pillow anywhere on that entire world. And the reason is a blanket. Not a blanket of cloth, but a blanket of gas. And to understand it, you have to understand what that air is made of. The atmosphere of Venus is roughly 96% carbon dioxide. Almost the whole sky, from the ground to the clouds, is the same gas we exhale. The same gas we have spent our own century learning to fear in far smaller amounts. Carbon dioxide has a particular talent. It lets the sunlight in, but it does not let the heat back out. Light arrives, strikes the surface, warms the rock, and the rock tries to release that warmth again as infrared, as the slow, invisible glow of anything hot. And the carbon dioxide catches it. It absorbs that outgoing heat and holds it and hands it back down to the ground, over and over, so that the warmth arrives and almost never leaves. This is the greenhouse effect, the same gentle process that keeps our own world livable in small measure. On Venus it did not stay small. On Venus it ran away. That phrase is the heart of everything, so let it come slowly, the way you would let your own breathing slow now, without effort, just softer with each turn. A runaway greenhouse. The story, as far as we can reconstruct it, begins with water. Venus may once have had oceans, or at least a great deal of water in its air, long ago, when it was young and less certain of what it would become. But Venus sits closer to the sun than we do, and the extra warmth began to lift that water into vapor. And water vapor, it turns out, is itself a greenhouse gas. It traps heat too, so the warming lifted more water into the sky, and the water in the sky trapped more heat, and the trapped heat lifted still more water, and there was no gentle place for the cycle to stop. Each turn fed the next. The warmth made more vapor, and the vapor made more warmth, until the oceans, if they were ever there, boiled entirely away into the atmosphere and were eventually lost. But the water was only the beginning of the trap, because as the planet grew hotter, the heat began to reach into the rock itself. On a cooler world, a great deal of carbon stays locked away, baked into stone, held in the minerals of the crust the way it is held in the limestone of our own continents. Heat a planet enough, and that carbon does not stay put. It cooks out of the rock and rises into the air as still more carbon dioxide, and so the blanket thickened. The more the air trapped heat, the more the heat drove carbon out of the ground, and the more carbon in the air thickened the blanket that trapped the heat. Another loop, feeding itself, tightening on the world with every turn, until nearly the entire sky was carbon dioxide, and the surface below it had become the hottest place in the solar system. There is one final cruelty folded into this, and it is a quiet one, easy to miss. All of that gas has weight. We spoke before of the crushing pressure at the surface, the 92 times the load of our own air, the small car balanced on a thumbnail. That pressure does not only crush, it also changes what the gas can do. When you pile carbon dioxide that deep and squeeze it that hard, it begins to absorb heat at wavelengths it would let slip away under gentler conditions. The very thickness that crushes a lander also seals more of the leaks in the blanket. So the pressure and the heat are not two separate punishments. They are the same machine. The weight of the air makes the trap tighter, and the tighter trap makes the heat higher, and there is nowhere, at the bottom of all that gas, for the warmth to escape to. You are not standing under weather on Venus. You are standing at the bottom of a sealed vault that the planet built for itself and can no longer open. Let your shoulders soften here, if they have not already. None of this is anything you need to carry. The heat is not in your room. The weight is not on your chest. It is a description of a place very far away, drifting past your window while you lie still. And you are allowed to let each number pass through you and keep going, the way the wind passes over a field and leaves the grass exactly where it was. For a long time we thought the machine had at least gone quiet. We imagined Venus as a finished thing, a corpse of a planet, cooked long ago and now simply holding its terrible temperature the way a stone holds heat after the fire is out. And then, only recently, that idea broke. In the 1990s, a spacecraft named Magellan swept around Venus and mapped nearly its whole surface with radar, seeing through the clouds to the land below. And then, that data sat in the archives for decades. In the year 2023, a pair of scientists went back into those old images, into a region near a great volcano called Mont Mons, and they compared pictures taken only months apart. And in that gap of months, one volcanic vent had changed. Its shape was different. Its size was different. In the space between two photographs, something on the surface of Venus had moved, had opened, had flowed. It was the first direct evidence anyone had ever found that Venus is not a dead world at all. It is still erupting. It is still alive. So the blanket is not draped over a body. It is wrapped around something that is still breathing. Somewhere down there, right now, in the 465-degree dark, rock is still melting and rising and spilling out onto the plain, adding its own heat to the vault, feeding, in its own small way, the very engine that keeps the whole sky sealed shut. The runaway did not just happen once, long ago, and then stop. It is a condition the planet lives inside of, a wound that never closes, a fever with no crisis and no recovery, only the endless holding of a temperature that no living thing could survive for a single second. And that is the answer the landers could never give us, because it was never written in the ground beneath them. It was written in the air above them, in 96% of a sky, in a blanket a planet wove for itself out of its own boiled oceans and its own cooked stone, and pulled tighter and tighter across the ages until it could never be lifted again. The heat was never the sun's doing. The heat was Venus doing this to itself. Consider what that means, gently, without reaching too hard to hold all of it at once. There is a world that sits closer to the sun than Venus does, a small grey planet named Mercury, running its tight, quick orbit through the most ferocious light anywhere in the solar system. When the sun stands directly overhead on Mercury, with no air and no shade and nothing to soften it, the ground there climbs to somewhere near 430 degrees. That is a heat beyond anything a human word was built to carry. And yet Venus, sitting almost twice as far out, catching less than half the sunlight that pours down onto Mercury, wrapped in all that extra distance, is hotter still. Not by a whisper, by tens of degrees everywhere, in every hour, at noon and at midnight alike. The planet that should be cooler is the one that melts lead. The planet standing further from the fire is the one that cannot cool down. You would expect the opposite. Everyone does. It is one of the quiet, wrong things we carry without ever noticing we carry it. The simple faith that closer to the sun means hotter, and further means cooler, the way a room grows warm near the fireplace and cold by the window. And for Mercury, that faith holds. Mercury takes in the light and cannot keep it. It has almost no air at all, nothing to trap the warmth, and so when its long day ends and the sun slips away, all the heat it gathered pours straight back out into the black and is lost. The night side of Mercury falls to hundreds of degrees below freezing. It bakes and then it shivers. It catches everything and holds nothing. Venus holds everything. That is the whole difference, and it is the whole answer. Not the distance to the sun, not the strength of the light, the blanket. The 96%, the crushing weight of that air, the way it takes the warmth the sun sends down and refuses, simply refuses, to let it leave. Sunlight comes in through the clouds, warms the rock, and the rock tries to send that warmth back up as it would on any world, as heat rising off a road at dusk. But the sky above it will not open. The heat is caught and passed back down and caught again, over and over, until the whole planet settles into a temperature it can never escape. Venus is not hot because it is close to the fire. Venus is hot because it will not let the fire go. And here is the part that should not comfort you, and will not, though you can let it pass through you softly all the same. That heat is not only kept, in places it is still being made. For a long time we could only wonder whether Venus, beneath its permanent cloud, was a dead thing, a planet that had done all its violence in some ancient age and then gone still. We had radar maps, sketched by a spacecraft called Magellan, that circled Venus back in the early 1990s, peering through the clouds with radio waves, because ordinary light could never reach the ground. Those maps showed volcanoes, thousands of them, more volcanoes than any other world we know. But a volcano in a photograph is only a shape. It does not tell you whether it sleeps or breathes. Then, in the year 2023, a scientist went back to those old maps, the ones taken more than 30 years before, and did something patient and simple. He compared two images of the same place, taken months apart, a volcanic vent on the flank of a mountain named Mart Mons. And in the time between those two passes, in those few short months, the vent had changed. Its shape was different, its size was different. Something had moved, something had opened. For the first time, in images that had been sitting quietly in an archive for 3 decades, we were looking at direct evidence that Venus is not a corpse. Venus is erupting. Somewhere under that sealed and glowing sky, molten rock is finding its way to the surface. Still, now, in our own lifetime, adding its own fresh heat to a planet that already cannot cool. Sit with the strangeness of that for a moment, the way you might sit with a sound in the dark that you cannot place. The proof of a living, erupting world was hidden inside pictures we already had. It was there all along, waiting in the noise, the way Venera 7's dying signal waited in the tape. We did not need a new machine to find it. We needed only to look again, more slowly, at what we thought we already understood. And what we found was fire feeding fire. A planet that boiled its oceans away, baked the carbon out of its own stone, and wove itself a blanket it could never lift, is also, beneath that blanket, still cracking open and bleeding heat from its core into an air that will hold every last degree of it forever. Let your body feel, for just a breath, what none of the numbers can quite say on their own. You have stood near an oven with the door open and turned your face away from the wall of heat that came out. You have stepped off a plane into a summer country and felt the air press wet and heavy against your skin. Multiply that until it stops meaning anything, and you are not even close. On the surface of Venus there is no turning your face away, because there is no direction that is cooler. There is no stepping into shade, because the heat does not come from the sun overhead, but from the whole sky at once. From the ground, from the air, from every side, an even and total warmth with no edge and no relief. Your body cools itself by shedding heat into its surroundings. It has done this every second of your life without your asking. On Venus, there is nowhere for that heat to go. The surroundings are hotter than you are, and they are hotter than anything, and they never ever stop. That is the mechanism, laid all the way open. Not a distant fire scorching a helpless rock. A world that made its own furnace, sealed its own lid and stokes it still from the inside. The sun lit the first spark long ago when the oceans were young. But everything since, Every degree above what a nearer, barer planet could hold, Venus has done to itself, and goes on doing, quietly in the dark, while volcanoes we only just learned were awake keep pushing new heat up into a sky that was already too full. And you are here, lying still, your own small warmth leaking gently and easily into the cool air of your own room, which asks nothing of you and takes nothing you cannot spare. There is no engine sealing your sky. The heat of your body rises and disperses and is let go, the way it is meant to, the way it always has. You do not have to hold anything tonight, not this planet, not its fever, not the weight of a number that has no flaw. Let it drift out of you the way your breath drifts out, unforced, unremembered. None of this is yours to carry. But Venus, for all its stillness, is not finished. The heat is only the beginning of what makes that surface impossible, only the first of the forces stacked one upon another in that hidden world, because it is not enough that the air is a furnace. It is not enough that the rock is still bleeding fire. There is the matter of what that same air weighs, and what it is made of, and what falls through it, and what it would do to a body long before the heat ever finished its work. Consider the weight of it. Not the fire this time, but the weight. Right now, above you, there is an ocean you have never once thought about. The air in your room is resting on you. It is pressing on your shoulders and on the backs of your hands, and on your closed eyelids, and it is done so every second of your life, and you have never felt it for even a moment. That is what a body is. You are built to carry the sky of this world, and you carry it so easily that you have forgotten it is there. At sea level on Earth, that entire column of air, all of it, from the ground beneath you up to the black edge of space, comes down to about 15 pounds on every square inch of you. Your body was tuned to exactly that. It pushes outward with just enough force to meet the sky pushing in, and the two hold one another in a balance so quiet, so complete, that you have never had to notice it working. You do not feel the weight, because you are the weight's equal. Tonight, lying still, you are winning a contest you did not know you were in. Now set that same body down on Venus, and the balance comes apart. The air there does not press with 15 pounds on a square inch. It presses with something closer to 1,350. The atmosphere at the surface of Venus bears down about 93 times harder than the air moving softly in and out of you right now. 92 times. Take the gentlest weight you know, the feeling of a blanket settling over your legs, the small warmth of a hand laid on your chest, and imagine the whole sky pressing with 92 of it, all at once, from every direction, with no side of you spared and no moment of relief. That is not weather. That is not wind. That is the simple, patient weight of the air itself. And on Venus the air is not thin and forgettable. It is thick. It is heavy. It is almost a fluid you could pour. There is a way to feel this number without leaving Earth, and you have almost certainly been near it. Think of the sea. Think of sinking down into it, past where the light goes green, past where it goes grey, down into the cold and the dark. The pressure that would crush you on the surface of Venus is roughly the pressure you would find about 900 meters down in Earth's own ocean. 3,000 feet of black water stacked over your head. Divers do not go there. Their bodies cannot. That depth belongs to submarines with steel hulls and to fish that have never seen the sun. And that is the pressure not of Venus's deep sea, because Venus has no sea, but of simply standing on its ground, in what passes there for open air, under what passes there for an ordinary sky. There is another way people have tried to hold this number, a smaller and closer way, 1 square inch, the size of a stamp, the size of your thumbnail. Picture that much surface, and picture 1,350 pounds resting on it. Not spread out, not shared, all of it, on that single small square. It is very near to balancing a small car on the tip of one thumb, and then asking the thumb to hold, and never move. Every square inch of you would carry that. The car on your thumbnail, and another on the next, and another on every part of you at once. A whole silent fleet of them. And none of it dramatic, none of it loud. Just the air doing what the air on that world does, which is lean on everything, with the patience of something that has all the time there has ever been. So let the heat go for a moment, set it aside. Imagine, if you like, that you could be shielded from it, wrapped somehow against the 465 degrees, kept cool inside some impossible skin. It would not save you. The weight alone would find you. The air would press until the spaces inside you that are meant to hold their shape could not hold it. It would press on your chest until drawing a breath was like lifting that car with the muscles between your ribs. And this is before you ask the one question that a body always, in the end, comes back to. Not how heavy is the air, not how hot, but what is it made of? What is it, exactly, that you would be asked to breathe? The answer is nothing you could breathe at all. The air of Venus is almost entirely carbon dioxide. About 96% of it, by measure, is the same gas your own body makes as waste and pushes out with every exhale. The gas you have been quietly releasing into this dark room all night long without a thought. On Venus it is not a trace, it is the sky, 96% carbon dioxide, and then about 3% nitrogen, and after that only slivers, only the faintest remainder of anything else. There is no oxygen waiting there for a lung. There is nothing in that vast heavy ocean of air that a human chest could turn into a single second of life. You would stand in an atmosphere 92 times denser than your own, an atmosphere so thick it almost has a current, and there would be nothing in all of it to breathe. You would drown in air, not water, air. An air that is only the exhaled breath of a whole dead world, held down by its own enormous weight, warm as a furnace and going nowhere. We know these numbers not from a distance, not from a guess, but because things were sent down into that weight to be broken by it, and they radioed back what they measured before they died. On the 15th of December, 1970, a small Soviet craft called Venera 7 came down through that atmosphere and became the first machine ever to land softly on another planet and speak from its surface. It lasted about 23 minutes. 12 years later, on the 1st of March, 1982, another one, Venera 13, settled onto the same crushing ground and measured the pressure around it directly. It read close to 89 atmospheres, 89 times the sky of Earth, confirmed not by theory, but by an instrument sitting in it, feeling it, until the feeling stopped. These were not fragile things. They were built like small deep sea vessels, sealed and armoured against exactly this. And still the clock on every one of them ran in minutes, not hours, because there is only so long that anything made by hands can stand inside a weight like that and a heat like that at the same time. You do not have to hold any of this. That is worth saying again, softly, here in the middle of the numbers. You are not on that surface. You are in your bed, under a sky of 15 honest pounds, breathing air that is more than a fifth pure oxygen, air that asks nothing of you and gives you everything, in and out, without your effort or your attention. Let the weight of Venus stay on Venus. Let the number pass through you and keep going. None of it is resting on your chest. Feel instead the small true weight that is actually there, the blanket, the pillow, the quiet pull of your own tiredness. And let that be the only thing you carry tonight. But there is more to that atmosphere than its weight and its poison, and this is where it begins to turn strange. Because a sky that thick and that deep is not still. It has layers. It has heights and depths of its own, the way an ocean does, and far above the baking ground, tens of kilometers up, where the pressure eases and the world grows cooler, something forms in that alien air. Clouds. Venus is wrapped, pole to pole, in a permanent deck of clouds so complete that no eye from outside has ever seen its surface through ordinary light. From a distance the planet is smooth and pale and lovely, a soft featureless pearl, the brightest thing in your morning or evening sky. and people have called it beautiful for as long as there have been people to look up. But those clouds are not made of water. They are not the gentle grey of a rainy afternoon at home. They are made of acid, concentrated sulfuric acid, the kind that eats through metal, hangs there in dense droplets in a great sailing layer, roughly 48 to 68 kilometers above the ground. And in the thickest of those droplets, the acid runs from 70 to 100% pure. A sky of it, an entire planet veiled in something that would burn the skin from a hand. And a cloud, anywhere, does what clouds do. It gathers, it grows heavy, and what is heavy, at last, begins to fall. So somewhere in that veiled and pressing sky, high over the volcanic plains, the acid gathers into rain and lets go, and begins the long fall down toward a ground it has never touched and never will. There is weather on Venus. There is rain on Venus, and the story of that rain, of where it goes and what stops it, is stranger than the weight and stranger than the heat, and it is waiting just below the clouds. Follow it down, follow the acid as it falls, and watch what becomes of it long before it arrives. Because it does not arrive. Somewhere around 25 to 40 kilometers above the surface, still miles up, still a great height above any stone, the falling droplets cross into air that is simply too hot to let them go on existing. The heat rising off the plains reaches up to meet the rain coming down, and in that meeting the acid does not splash and it does not pool. It comes apart. Each droplet unmakes itself in the open air, breaking back into the gases it was assembled from, into sulfur dioxide and water vapor, thinning and vanishing while the ground it was aimed at waits below, untouched, dry as it has always been. There is a name for rain that falls without landing. On Earth you have almost certainly seen it, on a dry summer evening, beneath some distant cloud, those soft grey streaks that hang in the air and trail off into nothing before they ever reach the fields. Virga, rain that gives up partway down. On Earth it is a curiosity, a trick of thirsty air, something you notice once and forget by morning. On Venus it is the entire water cycle of an entire world. The rain always fails. The rain has always failed. For as long as there has been a Venus to rain upon itself, not one single drop has finished the journey to the ground, and the gases those drops become do not simply scatter and end. They rise. The same warmth that tore the droplets open lifts their pieces back upward, the sulfur dioxide and the water vapor climbing toward the cold heights they fell from, and up there, 40 and 50 and 60 kilometers high, they cool, and they gather, and they become acid once more. They become cloud once more, and they fall once more, and they fail once more, at the same invisible line, into the same rising heat, again and again and again. It is a closed loop with no floor and no exit, a sky forever wringing itself out over a ground it can never reach. Picture a storm that has been trying to touch the surface for longer than there have been oceans on Earth, and has never once succeeded, and has never once stopped trying. Let that settle. You do not need to hold on to it. Let your shoulders soften into the mattress, let your breathing slow, and let the thought of that patient, failing rain drift down through you the way the rain itself never can. Now lift your attention from the failing rain to the air that carries it, because the air is moving, and the way it moves is its own quiet contradiction. High up, where the clouds sail at their 50 and 60 kilometers, the winds are ferocious. They race around the whole planet at speeds that would level a city here at home, gusting up toward 224 miles per hour, roughly 360 kilometers per hour. That is faster than the strongest hurricane you have ever heard a warning for. The entire cloud deck of Venus is dragged all the way around the planet in only about 4 of our days, a whole atmosphere spun like a loose coat around a body that turns beneath it far, far more slowly. If you were somehow floating up there, you would be flung around Venus over and over while the ground you circled barely moved at all. But sink now, sink down through the acid and the failing rain, down past the line where the droplets die, down toward the plains themselves. And as you descend, the wind quiets. It slows, and it slows, and it keeps on slowing, until at the surface the air is barely stirring. Down on the ground of Venus, the wind blows at something like 1 to 5 kilometers per hour. Walking pace, the pace of an unhurried stroll from one side of your room to the other. If you could stand there and feel it move against you, you would call it still. You would call it a hush. The gentlest possible breath of moving air. Except it would not feel gentle, because this is the same air that weighs more than 90 times what your air weighs. The same thick, heavy ocean of gas pressing in on every side of you at once. And when something that heavy moves, even slowly, it does not brush past. It leans, a breeze of 1 or 2 kilometers per hour in air that dense carries the push of a current in the deep sea, the slow, unarguable shove of moving water against a diver's chest. It is enough to nudge loose stones. It is enough to drift dust across the plains, one grain at a time. Here on Earth, a walking pace wind cannot lift a single dry leaf. There on Venus, a walking pace wind can move rock, not by speed, by the sheer weight of what is doing the moving. And here is the strangeness to carry with you into the quiet. If you measured only the number, only the kilometers per hour, you would say Venus has the calmest surface winds of any world we have ever visited. Almost no wind at all, but the number lies, the way so many of Venus's numbers lie, because the number leaves out the mass standing behind it. Slowness in air that heavy is not weakness. A whisper with the weight of a flood behind it is no longer a whisper. It is only a flood that has learnt to move quietly. So consider the floor that this slow flood crawls across, the ground the rain can never reach, because the ground itself is a puzzle just as deep. Every reading we have ever taken from that surface points to the same plain answer. This is a land built by fire, not shaped by rivers, not carved by slow ice, not folded and split and stitched back together the way our own crust is endlessly stitched. On Earth, the ground is alive in a slow and restless way. It is broken into great plates that grind against each other, that dive one beneath another, that raise mountains and swallow old seafloor and ferry whole continents across the face of the planet, across millions of years. That endless churning is why Earth keeps a young face. The surface is forever being torn down and remade. Venus does not do this. As far as anyone has yet been able to tell, Venus has no moving plates at all. Its crust is one single, stalled shell sealed shut over whatever burns beneath it. And something does burn beneath it, without plates to carry the heat away in the slow, orderly manner of Earth. The warmth of the interior seems to push up in great rising columns instead. Plumes of hot rock swelling from far below, blistering the surface into vast volcanic plains and broad, gently sloping mountains of old lava. It is a different way to be a planet. A closed way. A pressure that has nowhere clean to go. And for a long time that was the whole story we told. A world sealed and still and finished. Its fires banked long ago. But that story has begun, only very recently, to crack. In 2023, researchers went back to old radar images gathered decades earlier, and looking closely at the same patch of ground photographed months apart, they found something that should not have been possible on a dead world. And the very same year, other scientists began quietly arguing that Venus, so long assumed to have never moved at all, may in fact have churned and shifted like Earth once did, billions of years ago, before something shut it down. A world we had filed away as finished was, it seemed, still turning in its sleep, and still hiding what it had once been. And what it had once been is the question that quietly turns everything around. Because so far, you and I have stood on that surface together and simply felt the weight of the place. The heat, the pressure, the crushing air, all of it taken as given, as though these were things that had always been true of this world. But nothing about Venus was always true. The heat you have been lying beneath in your imagination is not an original feature of the planet. It is not the temperature Venus was born with. It is something that happened to Venus, slowly, across an unimaginable stretch of time. Something that built, and then could never be taken back. And this is the place where nearly everyone begins wrong. If you gathered a room full of people and asked them why Venus is the hottest planet in the solar system, most of them would give you the same answer, and it would sound perfectly sensible, and it would be mistaken. They would tell you it is because Venus is close to the sun. It is an easy thing to believe. Bring anything nearer to a fire and it grows warmer. That is how heat behaves in a kitchen, in a room, beside a candle. But that is not why Venus burns. That was never why. Because Venus is not the closest planet to the sun. Mercury is. Mercury sits far nearer the fire, something close to twice as near as Venus. A small grey scorched world with the sun swollen enormous and white above it. By the plain arithmetic of distance, Mercury ought to be the hottest place we have ever found. And at noon, on the face turned toward the sun, it comes close. The sunlit ground of Mercury climbs to somewhere around 430 degrees Celsius, a heat that would end you in an instant. A heat you would think could not be beaten by a world sitting so much farther out in the cold. And yet Venus, resting almost twice as far into the dark, is hotter still. Not by a little. Its surface holds near 465 degrees Celsius, about 870 degrees on the Fahrenheit scale, and it holds that heat everywhere. This is the single fact that undoes the easy answer. If distance from the sun were the thing that mattered most, this could not be. The nearer world should win. It does not. Something on Venus is doing what raw sunlight alone could never do. Something patient and total that has nothing to do with how far the planet sits from the fire. Consider what truly separates the two. Not their size, though Venus is far the larger. Not the rock they are made of, which is not so different. The thing that separates Mercury from Venus is air. Mercury has almost none. It is a bare stone hanging in space, and its heat is only skin deep, and only where the light actually falls. Turn Mercury's back to the sun, let it rotate into its own long night, and the warmth it gathered pours straight back out into the black. There is nothing to hold it. The night side of Mercury drops to hundreds of degrees below freezing, colder than anything your body has ever known, a swing so violent that noon and midnight on the same little world stand more than 600 degrees apart. Mercury cannot keep what it catches. It takes the sun's heat in one hand and lets it fall from the other. Venus keeps everything. That is the whole difference. Not the distance, not the size, the blanket. Venus is wrapped in an atmosphere so thick and so heavy that the heat which arrives can barely find its way back out again. And so the warmth does not drain away at night. It does not thin toward the poles. It does not ease in the shadows of the mountains. The temperature on Venus stays very nearly the same at noon and at midnight. It stays very nearly the same at the equator and at the poles, those poles that sound as though they ought to be frozen and are not frozen at all. Day or night, north or south, it is that same 465 degrees, steady and complete and everywhere. There is no cool side of Venus to walk toward. There is no night to wait out. The heat has closed around the entire planet, the way water closes over a stone, leaving no seam, no gap, no edge to slip through. And once you understand that it is the air and not the sun that is doing this, a different and stranger picture begins to open. Because an atmosphere that traps heat this completely is not a small thing that simply happened by accident. It is the end of a very long story. And the beginning of that story, as far as anyone can tell, may have looked far gentler than the furnace we measure now. Far more familiar. Perhaps, in the beginning, even a little like home. The idea goes something like this. Long ago, in the planet's youth, Venus may not have been a furnace at all. It may have had water, real water, warm shallow oceans and clouds and rain that reached the ground. A world you might almost have recognized from an airplane window. But Venus sat that little bit closer to the sun than Earth does. And the sunlight fell that little bit stronger, and slowly the water at the surface began to lift into the sky as vapor. And here is the quiet trap folded inside it, the mechanism that makes Venus a warning and not merely a curiosity. Water vapor is itself a heat-trapping gas. The more of it rose into the air, the more heat the air held onto. And the more heat the air held onto, the more water lifted from the surface to join it. Warmth feeding warmth. Vapor breeding vapor. A door that only ever opened one way. This is what scientists call a runaway greenhouse. And the word runaway is the honest heart of it, because there was no gentle point at which the process found its balance and quietly stopped. It ran. The oceans that Venus may once have carried did not simply shrink back to shorelines. They rose into the sky altogether and were lost. And with the water gone, the planet grew hotter still, hot enough at last to bake the carbon that had been locked away inside the surface rock straight out into the open air as carbon dioxide, that same heavy, suffocating gas you have been leaning against this whole time. More gas meant a thicker blanket. A thicker blanket meant more heat held in. More heat meant more carbon cooked from the ground. And so it turned, around and around, each turn a little worse than the one before, until Venus arrived at the world we can read today. An atmosphere that is about 96% carbon dioxide, with only a few percent of nitrogen and the barest trace of anything else. A surface pressure that would crush you, a heat that never lifts and never will. Not on any time scale that means anything to a human life. And there is a final cruel detail waiting in the physics of it, one that seals the door completely. Under the enormous weight of that atmosphere, pressed down to pressures we do not meet anywhere in the open air of Earth, the carbon dioxide itself begins to behave in ways it otherwise would not. It begins to absorb bands of heat, whole wavelengths of escaping warmth, that at gentler pressures it would simply let slip through and out into space. The very crush of the air turns the air into a better trap. So the pressure and the heat are not two separate torments standing side by side. They are the same machine, each one deepening the other, each one sealing the warmth in tighter, the worse the whole thing becomes. So when you feel that 465 degrees in your imagination tonight, understand what you are truly feeling. You are not feeling the nearness of the sun. You are feeling the memory of an ocean that boiled away and never returned. You are feeling every ton of carbon that ever cooked out of the ground and rose into a sky that would not let it go. You are feeling the end state of a process that began small and reasonable and almost survivable, and then simply refused to stop. And that is the thought I would like to leave resting on you for a moment, gently, because it is the thing that changes the shape of everything we have said so far. We began, you and I, by calling Venus the twin of Earth, and we meant it as a fact about size, a matter of diameter and mass. Two worlds that came out of the same young solar system at very nearly the same measurements, but the twinning runs deeper and colder than that. Venus is not a foreign kind of planet that formed under alien rules. It is a planet that began within reach of nearly everything Earth has, and then followed one runaway thread all the way down into this. The distance between a living world and a 465-degree tomb was never as wide as it feels while you lie here in the dark. It was a matter of a little more sunlight, and a feedback that found no flaw to catch it. You do not have to carry the fear of that. Let it be only a thought, a large and slow one, the kind that can pass through a quiet mind without ever catching hold. Let your shoulders lower. Let the weight of the whole day go the way of everything else, out and away into the same wide dark. None of this asks anything of you. It is only Venus, turning in the black, wearing the heat it made for itself. And it made more than heat, because a blanket that thick, an atmosphere pressed that hard against a planet, does not simply sit still and smother in silence. It moves, it rises and falls, it storms in slow motion, high above that motionless furnace of a ground, carrying things we are only just beginning to see clearly, in a sky that behaves like nothing above any surface you have ever walked. Begin high, because that is where the weather is. Far above the ground you could never stand on. At a height of roughly 48 to 68 kilometers, there hangs a deck of clouds so complete that it wraps the whole planet without a seam. From a great distance it is beautiful. It is the reason Venus shines the way it does in your evening sky, that steady white lamp that has followed people home for as long as there have been people to walk home. The cloud throws back the sunlight like a mirror, and for most of human history, that softness was all anyone could see. A pale, gentle, featureless glow. It looked like the most peaceful place in all the sky. Here is the thing most people get wrong, and it is easy to get wrong, because the word we use for it carries all the wrong feelings. We call them clouds, and when you hear the word cloud, your body already knows what it means. It means water. It means the cool grey of a rainy afternoon, the smell of a coming storm, the soft thing you looked up at as a child and gave the shape of an animal. That is not what floats over Venus. Not water, not vapour lifted off some warm sea. These clouds are made of sulfuric acid, droplets of it, some of them nearly pure, 70 to 100% acid by weight, hanging in a haze tens of kilometers thick. If you could drift a hand through them, they would not cool you. They would strip the skin from your fingers. The most peaceful looking thing about this planet, the very glow that once made people name it for a goddess of love, is a sky full of the same acid we keep locked behind warning labels down here. And it rains. That part is almost true. High in that acid deck the droplets gather and grow heavy, exactly the way rain gathers and grows heavy over your own town. And they begin to fall. But this is the second thing that undoes the ordinary picture. The rain on Venus never lands. Not once, anywhere on the planet, has a drop of that acid rain ever reached the ground. It falls out of the cloud base and sinks through the thickening air, and somewhere around 25 to 40 kilometers up, still far above the surface, it meets heat so severe that the drops simply come apart. They boil away before they can arrive. The acid breaks back into the gases it was made from, into sulfur dioxide and water vapor, and those gases rise again on the heat, climb back to the cold heights, and gather once more into the clouds they fell from. There is a name for rain that vanishes in the air before it reaches the ground. On Earth you have seen it on a summer horizon, a grey brushstroke hanging beneath a distant cloud, never quite arriving. It is called Virga. Venus has Virga that circles the entire world and never ends. A rain that falls forever and lands nowhere. Let that one stay with you a moment, softly, before it dissolves the way the rain does. You do not have to hold it. A storm with no ground to fall on, weather that only ever falls halfway. Then there is the wind, and the wind hides the strangest reversal of all. Look at the top of that cloud deck and you find fury. The upper clouds are torn around the planet at speeds that would flatten any city you have ever lived in. Gusts reaching something near 224 miles an hour, fast enough to race the whole way around the globe, while the solid world beneath them barely creeps. The whole atmosphere up there spins far faster than the planet itself, a runaway sheet of storm that never tires and never breaks. If that were the whole story, you would picture the surface as the worst wind that ever blew. And you would be wrong, in the gentlest possible way, because down at the bottom, on that motionless orange plain, the wind almost stops. Not a gale, not even a strong breeze. The air at the surface of Venus moves at something like 1 to 5 kilometers an hour. That is slower than you are breathing right now. It is the pace of a slow walk across a quiet room, the pace of someone crossing to turn off a light. After all that violence overhead, the ground is nearly still, and here is where the mind wants to relax, and here is where Venus quietly refuses to let it. A walking pace wind sounds like nothing. On Earth it is nothing. A breath you would barely feel on the back of your hand. But the air down there is not the thin, kind air you are lying in. It is the crushing atmosphere we have already met, more than 90 times denser, so heavy that it behaves less like air and more like water. And so that slow, strolling wind does not brush against things, it leans on them. It pushes with the patient weight of a current at the bottom of the sea. It is strong enough at that walking pace to shove grains of sand, to nudge small stones, to press against a standing thing the way a slow tide presses against your legs when you wade out from a beach. Not a gust, a pressure, not something you would hear, something you would feel trying endlessly and gently to move you. So take the whole picture back from the false one you were handed. Not soft white clouds, but a shell of acid. Not rain that falls, but rain that never arrives. Not a screaming surface storm, but a silence at the bottom that still pushes like the ocean. Every soft and familiar word we reached for, the words we use for the weather over our own heads, turns out to mean its opposite here. The gentle turns corrosive, the falling never lands, the still air shoves. It is almost as if the planet learnt the vocabulary of a calm evening and used every word of it to build something that would kill you. And yet none of that reaches you tonight. You can let the picture assemble itself and then let it drift apart, the way the acid drifts apart in the heat, back into nothing you have to keep. There is no storm in your room. There is only the slow, enormous storm of a world that will go on turning and falling and pushing, whether or not anyone is ever there to stand beneath it. But the sky over Venus is not finished surprising us. For all its silence at the surface and all its fury above, there is a question that has hung over that acid deck for the better part of 50 years. A flicker that some instruments swore they saw and others swore was never there at all. Something, high in those clouds, may be flashing in the dark. For the better part of 4 decades, that single possibility split the people who study this world into 2 quiet camps. One camp listened to the old spacecraft, to the faint recordings the early probes carried home, and they heard it. Crackles at just the right frequencies, sharp little bursts riding in the radio noise, the kind of electrical whisper that here on Earth almost always means a storm is somewhere below, talking to itself in the dark. And the other camp listened to those very same recordings and heard nothing of the sort. They heard the machine, interference, the hiss of the solar wind against the instrument, a pattern the human mind reaches out and shapes into thunder, because the human mind has heard thunder its whole life and cannot quite let a rumble stay meaningless. For 40 years, neither side could win. No one had ever simply watched the night side of Venus and caught the sky in the act of doing it. Then a small spacecraft settled into orbit around the planet, sent from Japan, and it carried a camera built for one narrow purpose. Not to map the ground, not to weigh the air, only to stare into the blackness on the far side of the world and wait patiently for a flash. And one night, in a span of a few hundred milliseconds, it saw one. Let that length of time rest for a moment against something your own eyes already know. Here on Earth, a bolt of lightning lives and dies in about 1 millisecond. A single blink of it, quicker than you can register, gone before the thunder has even begun to travel toward you across the fields. What that camera recorded above Venus lasted a few hundred times longer than that, and it burned something like 10 times brighter than the lightning you have watched drop behind the hills from your own window on a summer night. A slow, wide flare of light in a sky that should have been empty. A whole world, for the length of a held breath, lighting itself from within. And still, even this did not settle the argument. That is the strange, unfinished honesty of it. A flash was seen, and clearly seen, and yet a flash is not quite proof of a storm. Some argue it could be lightning of a kind Earth has never made. Others wonder whether it might be something falling from space. A small stone burning as it enters that thick air, mistaken for a spark born in the clouds. As far as anyone can tell tonight, the question is still open. After half a century of listening, of arguing, of building instruments for the sole purpose of ending the debate, we have a single bright frame and no agreement about what made it. There is a whole planet up there, close enough to be our neighbour, and we do not yet know for certain whether its sky can throw lightning. You do not have to solve it. Nobody in the room with you is asking. You can let the flash arrive behind your eyes, and then let it fade, the way it faded above Venus, back into a dark that keeps almost none of its own records. It is enough tonight to know that a world can hold a secret that simple and keep it for 50 years. But that flicker in the clouds is only the smallest of the things missing over that surface. To feel the real depth of how strange this planet is, you have to notice what is not there at all, and what its absence has been quietly doing for longer than there has been life on Earth. Picture the ground you are lying above right now. Beneath it, far down, past the rock and the mantle, there is a core of molten iron, turning slowly, churning against itself. And out of that churning, out of nothing you can see or feel, Earth spins a magnetic field. It rises from the poles and wraps the entire planet in an invisible shell, a shield made of nothing but motion and metal, and it reaches far out past the atmosphere. It is the reason the compass finds north. It is the reason the sky glows green near the poles instead of stripping away. Every second of your life, that unseen field has been standing between you and a wind of charged particles pouring off the sun, turning that wind aside the way a stone in a river turns the current. You have never once had to think about it. That is the whole mercy of it. It works in complete silence, and it has never stopped. Venus is nearly the same size as Earth. By almost every measure that should matter, it is the twin. It very likely carries an iron core of its own, deep beneath that crushing air. And yet Venus spins out no such shield. There is no global magnetic field wrapped around it. There is only a thin, borrowed magnetism, a weak and temporary thing the solar wind itself drapes over the planet as it strikes the upper edge of the atmosphere. Not a shield the world makes from within, a faint smear the wind presses onto it from without. Turn off that wind, and it would simply be gone. Sit with what that means across deep time. For billions of years, with nothing to turn the solar wind aside, that wind has been allowed to reach the top of Venus's atmosphere and take it. Not in a storm, not in a single catastrophe, particle by particle, atom by atom, the sun has been lifting the air off that planet and carrying it away into space, slowly, steadily, for a stretch of time so long that our whole history would not register inside it. Not an explosion, an erosion, the patient theft of a world's own sky, running the entire time, without pause, without mercy, without a single day off across an age that dwarfs anything a human number can hold. And here is where the true weight of Venus settles, if you let it. Not in any one of these facts, but in the way they stack. Think of everything that keeps your own world gentle: a magnetic field standing between the air and the sun, oceans drinking the carbon down out of the sky and locking it into stone, a crust that breaks into moving plates, carrying the planet's inner heat up and out and letting it escape, a day and a night that trade places quickly enough for the ground to cool in the dark before the light returns. 4 quiet safeguards, working together, none of which you have ever had to notice. Now take them away, one after another, and watch what is left. Venus has no magnetic shield. Venus has no ocean to swallow the carbon, that water long since boiled off and lost. Venus shows no sign of the moving plates that let Earth breathe out its heat, so the warmth stays trapped inside the rock and the air with nowhere to go. And Venus turns so slowly, one full rotation taking 243 Earth days, that the idea of the ground cooling overnight becomes almost meaningless. The night there is not a rest. The night lasts weeks, and it is nearly as scorching as the day. It is not that Venus is a broken version of Earth. That is the thing that unsettles once you see it clearly. It is not damage, it is absence, as if the same handful of ingredients were laid out for 2 worlds side by side, and one of them was assembled with every safeguard quietly left out. No shield, no ocean, no moving crust, no cool night. Each thing that makes your planet livable is not failing over there. It was simply never installed, and every one of those missing pieces has spent the entire lifetime of the solar system reinforcing all the others. The heat feeding the pressure holding the heat, the still air keeping the whole trap sealed, until the world became the single most hostile place any human machine has ever touched and lived to describe. There is a mathematics hiding underneath all of it that your ordinary day never shows you. You move through a world so carefully balanced that the balance has become invisible. The air sits at a pressure your body has never once had to fight. The heat stays inside a narrow band your skin was built for. The sky holds still above you and asks nothing. And because it all works, you have never had to know how thin the margin really is. How many separate things had to go right and go on going right for the simple act of lying still in the dark to be possible at all. Venus is what the same physics does when even a few of those things go the other way. Not cruelly, not on purpose, just following the same rules your own world follows, toward a completely different end. None of that reaches you here. You can feel the whole weight of it and still be perfectly safe. Your own air resting easy in your chest, your own ground cool and steady beneath you, held inside all four of those silent mercies at once. You do not have to carry the missing shield, or the stolen sky, or the age of slow erosion. You can let them settle over you, and then let them lift away. Because there is one more layer beneath even this. One last turn of the strangeness, where the very thing that makes Venus lethal begins to fold back on itself and hint at something almost tender in the middle of all that ruin. Consider the water. Because there was water here once, as far as anyone can tell. Not an ocean you would recognize, not the cool blue thing you have swum in or watched from ashore, but water all the same, resting on a young world that looked far more like your own than like the furnace it became. Venus and Earth were born from the same drifting cloud of dust, at nearly the same distance from the same young sun, so close in size that if you set the two of them side by side in the dark, you would struggle to say which was which. Venus measures a little over 12,000 kilometers across. Earth is barely 600 kilometers wider, and for a long stretch at the very beginning, they may have been sisters in more than shape. Two damp grey worlds under two thin skies. Two places where, in principle, on some ancient morning, you might have stood without dying. That is the tenderness folded into all the ruin. Not that Venus was always a monster, but that it may once have been a candidate, a near miss, a version of home that took one different turn, and the turn is the part the everyday world keeps hidden from you. Because it was not a catastrophe, not an impact, not some single violent hour. It was patience. The sun, like all young stars, brightened slowly across the ages, and Venus, sitting a little nearer, felt that extra warmth first. That warmth lifted more of its water into the air, and here is the quiet arithmetic that your calm evenings never show you. Water vapor is not only water, it is itself a blanket. It holds heat in. So the warming lifted the vapor, and the vapor trapped more heat, and the trapped heat lifted still more vapor, and each turn fed the next. Not a single push, but a loop. Not addition, but multiplication. This is how a world tips over, not all at once, but by a number that keeps doubling back on the thing that made it. You know this feeling from nowhere in your own life, because on Earth the loop never ran away. Something always caught it. But on Venus nothing did. The oceans, wherever they were, boiled off into the sky, and once the water was gone from the ground, there was nothing cool left to drink the carbon down. On your world, carbon dioxide gets pulled out of the air and dissolved into the seas and locked away inside stone, quietly over unimaginable spans, which is why the sky you are breathing tonight is mostly nitrogen and oxygen, and only a whisper of anything else. On Venus, with no ocean to catch it, the carbon simply baked out of the rocks and stayed in the air, and it stayed, and it stayed, until the atmosphere was 96% carbon dioxide, with about 3% nitrogen and almost nothing else. A sky made of the one gas your own world worked so hard to bury. Then the pressure did something stranger still, something you would never guess from standing in a warm room. Carbon dioxide, crushed to the density it reaches down at that surface, 92 times the weight of the air on your chest right now, begins to absorb bands of infrared light that it would let pass at gentler pressures. The blanket does not merely thicken, it learns new colors of heat to hold, and so the atmosphere became a one-way door. Sunlight could still trickle down through the haze and warm the ground, but the warmth the ground gave back could no longer climb out. It was caught and passed sideways and held. That is why the temperature never breaks. 465 degrees Celsius, near enough, is not a noon reading. It is the reading everywhere and always. Dayside and nightside, equator and pole. The dense air is such a patient carrier of heat that it smears the warmth evenly across the whole globe, so there is no cool place to walk to, no shadow that offers relief, no hour of the long night when the ground finally lets go. On Earth, the desert that scorches you at midday can freeze you before dawn. On Venus, there is no before dawn worth mentioning, and there would be no relief in it if there were. And now hold Mercury beside it for a moment, because this is where your intuition gets quietly overturned. Mercury sits far closer to the Sun. Venus rides nearly twice as far out. Every instinct in your body says the nearer world must be the hotter one. It is not. Mercury reaches only about 430 degrees at its blazing midday, and then, having almost no air to hold anything, it dumps that heat straight back into space and plunges far below freezing in its own long night. Venus, farther out, wrapped in its impossible blanket, simply stays hotter. The hottest surface of any world that circles this sun does not belong to the planet closest to the fire. It belongs to the one that learned to keep the fire in. Distance is not the story. The blanket is the story. And that is the kind of truth that a warm, dark room will never teach you on its own. None of this is anything you need to solve tonight. You can let the loop turn in your mind, and then let it slow, and let it stop, and set it down. The doubling is not happening to you. Your own air is still mostly the gentle gases, still resting easy, still letting the warmth of your body drift up and away into a night that will actually cool. You are the near miss that landed on the other side. Let that be a comfort you do not have to hold too tightly. Let it soften your shoulders and go. Because there is one more thing the deep time here reveals, and it is that the world is not finished. This is not a corpse. In the year 2023, scientists went back to old radar images gathered decades earlier by the Magellan spacecraft, and they looked with fresh and patient eyes at a volcanic vent near a mountain called Mont Mons. And between two passes taken months apart, the vent had changed. It had shifted its shape, swollen in size, the way a wound does when something beneath it is still moving. It was the first direct evidence anyone had ever caught of an eruption happening on Venus. The planet is still venting its heat, still alive underneath, and it has to be, because it has no better way to breathe. Your own world lets its inner heat out gently, along the seams where great plates of crust grind and slide and pull apart, spreading the release across the whole planet over the ages. Venus, as far as anyone can tell, has no such seams, no moving plates, no slow shared exhale. So the heat gathers below in vast plumes and forces its way up through the crust in blisters and floods, wherever it can. A planet holding its breath and letting it go only in sudden places. The same trapped energy above and below, nowhere for any of it to go. And when you sit inside all of that, the cruelest fact turns strangely gentle. The greenhouse effect that murdered this world is the very same effect that saves your own. The gentle blanket of gases that keeps your night from freezing you, that holds this planet at the mild temperature where a body can lie still and breathe and dream, is not different in kind from the thing that cooked Venus into a furnace. It is the same rule, only the dose is different. Turn the dial a few notches, feed the loop, take away the sea, and the warmth that cradles you becomes the heat that ends everything. Home and horror running on one identical law, separated by nothing but degree. You are on the safe side of that dial tonight. But the strangeness does not stop even here. Because beneath the heat and the pressure and the slow dead spin of it all, there is a final layer to this world, quieter than any of them, and it is the one that undoes the last of what you thought you understood. Think of your own world for a moment, not as the ground beneath you, but as something that reaches out past its own edge, around the earth, far above the air, above the weather, above the highest cloud you have ever seen. There is something that has no weight and makes no sound, something you have never once felt in your life, and it is holding all of us. It is the planet's own magnetism. Deep inside the Earth, an ocean of molten iron turns and churns, slow and enormous and hot, and that turning of metal generates an invisible field that pours out of one pole, arcs across all the space around us, and folds back down into the other. You are sitting inside it right now. Every compass that has ever pointed a lost traveler home was leaning, quietly, into this thing you cannot see, and it does far more than turn a needle. High above you, the sun is always breathing outward. It sends a thin, endless wind of charged particles streaming across the whole solar system, a wind that never slows and never stops, that has been blowing since before the Earth had a face. That wind would strip the air from a bare and unshielded world. It would peel the atmosphere away, one small piece at a time, across the long slow ages, until there was nothing left to breathe. And your magnetic field is the thing that stands in its way. It catches that solar wind and bends it around you, the way water parts around the front of a ship and closes again behind. The air moving softly in and out of you tonight, the breath you are not even thinking about, is air that this invisible shield has been protecting for billions of years. Now turn back toward Venus. Turn back to the twin. Here is the quiet fact, the one that has been waiting underneath all the others. Venus is very nearly the size of the Earth. It is built, as far as anyone can tell, from the same kinds of rock and metal, layered in the same order, wrapped around what is almost certainly the same sort of heavy iron heart. By every reasonable guess we can make, it should have a churning core much like our own. It should, by all rights, have a field of its own reaching out into the dark, its own invisible cocoon, its own compass pointing some patient traveler home. It does not. Venus has no global magnetic field, none that the planet makes for itself. Where the Earth wraps itself in that steady self-made shield, Venus lies open. There is no great field spilling out of one pole and curling back into the other. There is no unseen hand holding the solar wind at arm's length. And this is not a small thing. This is not just one more number on the long list of ways the twin runs too hot and too heavy. This is a planet so like ours in size, in weight, in the metal at its center, simply failing to do the one quiet thing our world does without effort, the thing that has quietly kept us alive. Let that settle for a moment. You do not have to keep it. Let your shoulders go soft against whatever is holding you. Let the fact drift in and drift out, but hold its shape, just gently, before it slips away into sleep. The twin that should have had a shield, and never grew one. What Venus carries instead is a thinner, borrowed thing. Because the sun's wind cannot simply pour straight through, the upper reaches of Venus, the high electrified layer above the clouds, push back a little on their own. Where the solar wind slams into that layer, it drapes and bunches and folds itself into a weak, faint magnetism around the planet. Not made in the core, pressed onto the outside by the wind itself. The word for it is an induced magnetosphere, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It is not a shield the planet raised. It is more like a dent the wind leaves in the air as it rushes past, a thin skin of resistance with nothing solid standing behind it. And because that skin is so weak, the solar wind reaches deeper. It gets closer to the world. Over the enormous span of the planet's history, it has been able to take hold of the outer edge of that thick atmosphere and pull, slowly, patiently, carrying tiny pieces of Venus away into space, one at a time, for longer than there have been oceans anywhere at all. There is a strange and quiet irony folded into that, and it is worth resting on. The atmosphere of Venus is the very thing that kills it. The heat, The pressure, the more than 90 times too much air, the carbon dioxide pressing down like the weight of a deep sea. And yet even that vast, murderous atmosphere is being nibbled away at the top, from above, by the same solar wind our own field turns aside. The furnace is not sealed. It leaks slowly into the black. It is being unmade at its outer edges in the same slow moment that it crushes everything down on its floor. A world eating itself at both ends and taking an eternity to do it. So the picture you had been building all night begins, here, to come quietly apart. Because a planet with no shield, wrapped in an atmosphere the wind is slowly stealing, is a planet scientists thought they had understood, and then they looked closer, and it stopped being simple. For a very long time there was a question about Venus that refused to lie down and settle. A question that lived up in those enormous, endless acid clouds. The question was whether the sky over Venus flickers, whether, somewhere in all that churning sulfur and shadow, there is lightning. On Earth, you know lightning in your body before you know it in your mind. The white flash first, the held breath, the slow count of seconds in the dark, and then at last, the low roll of thunder reaching you from far away. You have watched it through a window from somewhere warm and safe, half afraid and half comforted, the way people have watched it for as long as there have been people. It is one of the oldest things we have ever feared and been soothed by at the very same time. And for something close to 40 years, no one could say for certain whether Venus knew that flicker too. It should be a simple thing to check. But Venus does not let you look. The clouds are total. They wrap the planet in an unbroken shell, so bright and so thick that for most of human history no eye and no telescope could see the surface at all. You cannot simply watch the storms from a distance, the way you might watch weather roll across a far hill. Every attempt to catch the flash had to fight through a veil that hides almost everything. Some spacecraft thought they heard the crackle of it, the electric whisper that lightning leaves behind. Others passed close and heard nothing. The evidence came and went, argued for and argued against, for decade after decade, until the whole idea of lightning on Venus became less a fact than a long, unfinished quarrel among the people who study the sky. And then, not so long ago, a small spacecraft from Japan settled into orbit around the planet, carrying a camera built for one narrow purpose. A camera made to watch for exactly this, to stare down into the clouds and wait for the sky to give itself away. And one time, it caught something. A single flash of light, blooming up out of the cloud tops, of just the kind that lightning would make, but it did not look like the lightning you know. A bolt over your own house is gone almost before you can register it, over in about 1,000th of a second, a blink inside a blink. This flash on Venus lingered. It held for a few hundred of those same tiny slivers of time, hundreds of times longer than a strike on Earth, and it burned far brighter, something like 10 times brighter than the ordinary lightning that lights our own storms. A slow, enormous, brilliant flash in a sky that should not, by every rule you have learnt tonight, be able to make one at all. And that flash has never truly been settled. For something close to 40 years, long before that little camera ever reached orbit, scientists had been quietly arguing about whether Venus makes lightning at all. Some were certain they had heard it, faint crackles in the radio, whispers that could have been storms far below. Others heard only noise, only the ordinary hiss of a planet talking to itself. So the flash did not end the argument. If anything, it deepened it. Because a burst of light that lasts hundreds of times too long and burns something like 10 times too bright is not a familiar thing wearing a strange coat. It is something we do not yet have a proper name for, and even now, no one can tell you with any certainty what lit that corner of the Venusian sky. You can let that sit with you for a moment. You do not need to solve it tonight. Nobody has. And this really is the shape of Venus, over and over again. Every time you think you have found the bottom of its strangeness, the bottom gives way, and there is another room beneath it. Consider the thing you cannot see from the surface, the thing you cannot see from anywhere at all, and yet perhaps the thing that mattered most of all. Earth has a shield. Deep inside our planet, a core of molten iron turns and churns in the dark, and that slow turning throws out an invisible field, a vast cloak of magnetism that reaches far beyond the sky. You have never felt it, you will never feel it, but it is one of the reasons you are alive. It catches the wind that pours endlessly off the sun, a steady stream of particles moving at speeds you could not begin to picture, and it turns that wind gently aside, folds it around us, so that our air is not slowly stripped away into space. Venus has almost none of this, and that is the quiet astonishment of it, because Venus should. It is nearly the size of Earth. It very likely carries an iron core of its own, somewhere down in the heat. By every reasonable guess, it ought to spin up a shield the way our world does. And yet, when our spacecraft went looking, they found only the faintest trace. A weak, borrowed magnetism, not made deep inside the planet, but scraped together at the edges, where the solar wind presses against the top of the atmosphere and drags a thin field into being. Not a shield the planet built for itself, only the shadow of one pressed onto it from outside. And so, for billions of years, the raw wind of the sun has washed against Venus almost unopposed, working patiently at its air, carrying small pieces of it away into the black. Sit with the whole picture now, the way it is gathered over these long hours. A world the size of our own. A world that may once have held oceans. A world that heated until its seas boiled off into the sky, that baked its own stone until the air turned thick and heavy and endless, that lost the shield which might have guarded it, that wrapped itself in acid and pressure, and a heat that never once sleeps. Not one thing went wrong on Venus. Many things went wrong, and each one made the others worse, until the whole planet settled into the state you have been listening to tonight. A twin of Earth, born right beside us, shaped from the same rough materials, and turned into something no living thing could ever touch. And here, if you are still with me, drifting or awake, is where a small and stubborn hope tries to lift its head, because the surface is not the only place on Venus. It is only the very bottom. And when you have a planet whose whole trouble is that it is too low, too deep, too crushed beneath the weight of its own atmosphere, there is one obvious thing to do. You go up. You leave the ground far behind, and you rise. And as you rise, something quietly remarkable begins to happen to all those brutal numbers you have been carrying with you. The pressure eases. The heat loosens its grip. Climb high enough, up to around 50 kilometers above that molten plain roughly 30 miles into the sky, and you reach a layer where the planet very nearly forgets to be cruel. Up there, the pressure falls until it is close to the pressure you are resting in right now, the ordinary forgotten weight of air at the surface of your own world. And the temperature settles into something a human body actually knows. Not 460 degrees. Not enough to melt lead, somewhere around 30 to 70 degrees Celsius, which is to say something like 85 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. A warm day, a hot afternoon, a sauna at the very upper edge of it, but survivable, bearable, a temperature you could stand inside. It sounds, for a single breath, like a door, and engineers have taken that door seriously enough to draw the plans. There is a real idea, worked out in careful detail, of never landing on Venus at all, but floating above it instead. A city in the clouds. A great buoyant craft riding that gentle layer where the air turns kind, held up by the very thickness of the atmosphere that murders everything below. On Venus, ordinary breathable air would float like a balloon, because the air all around it is so much heavier, so you would need surprisingly little to stay aloft. You could simply hang there, 50 kilometers up, in a warm and glowing haze, looking down at a surface no human will ever walk. And yet, you knew by now that there would be an and yet, because that kind layer, that one forgiving band of sky, is not clean and it is not empty. It is the cloud deck itself. It is the exact height where the sulfuric acid gathers thickest, those endless pale clouds you met earlier tonight, drifting somewhere between roughly 48 and 68 kilometers, made of droplets that would eat through metal and skin with equal patience. The one place on Venus where the temperature would not kill you in an instant is a place drowned in acid. So even the hope arrives wrapped in its own quiet threat. You could survive the heat there, you could survive the pressure there, but you would be suspended inside a corrosive fog, in a sky with no ground you could ever safely reach, on a planet that is still, even now, doing things beneath you that we do not understand. And that, perhaps, is the truest thing this whole long night has been slowly circling. That Venus does not hand you a clean answer anywhere, not on the surface, where you would be crushed and cooked and smothered in a single heartbeat. Not in the sky, where the one survivable layer is also the one that would gently dissolve you. Not in its lightning, which may or may not be lightning. Not in its missing shield, which should be there and simply is not. Everywhere you reach for solid footing, the planet hands you another question instead. We have touched its surface only a handful of times, and never for very long. A few Soviet landers, decades ago now, blinking their measurements up through the murk before the heat reached in and silenced them, one after another, none of them lasting even a full 2 hours. And then, for a very long while, we simply stopped going down. The surface became a place we knew of but no longer visited, a flaw beneath the clouds that we let quietly slip back into rumor. But we have not stopped looking. Even now, there are eyes being built, instruments being readied, plans drawn up to return to Venus and study it harder than we ever have. To map that hidden surface, to fall slowly through that poisoned air and taste it on the way down. To ask again the questions we have never quite answered. The going back has not happened yet. It is still a promise, still a scattering of dates on a distant calendar, still years of patience away. But it is coming, and so tonight you are left in the strangest possible place. Not on the surface, not in the clouds, somewhere in between, holding a world that is our sister and our warning at once. A planet that shows you exactly what our own could have become, and quietly hints at what it still might. You have learned what it would take to stand there, and why nothing living ever could. You have learned how the heat is made, and how the air betrays itself, and how even the softest breeze there carries the weight of an ocean current. What is left now is not another fact. What is left is the harder, quieter thing. The question of what all of it means, for that pale, patient light you sometimes catch low in your own evening sky, and for the fragile, temperate, deeply unlikely world you are lying on right now. So let it mean something before you let it go. Not a lesson, exactly. Not a moral you could write down and keep. Something softer than that. The way a long night of learning settles into you without your deciding to hold it. You have carried this planet through the dark for a while now, and it has weighed on you the way real knowledge always does. A little heavier than you expected, a little harder to set back down. And so the last thing left to do tonight is not to add to it, but to loosen your grip on it, one finger at a time, and let it drift back out into the wide dark it came from. Because here is the truth of what you have been holding. You have been holding a world that no one has touched in longer than most of the people alive today have been alive. Since the last of those Soviet machines went quiet on that scorched and orange plain, no human hand and no human instrument has rested on the surface of Venus. Not one. 4.5 decades of our history have passed, whole lives lived from cradle to memory, and that surface has gone on being exactly what it is, unwatched, unvisited, unbothered by us. The heat has stayed near 465 degrees, day and night, pole and equator, the way it stayed for all the centuries before we ever knew a number to put on it. The pressure has gone on resting there, 90 times heavier than the air on your own chest right now, patient as stone. And somewhere in that thick and shrouded sky, if the cameras were reading it right, a flash may have jumped between the clouds while no one on Earth was looking. Perhaps it did. Perhaps in the years since the last lander died, The lightning we argued about for 40 years has been leaping through those acid clouds again and again, a slow and silent storm no eye has ever truly seen, only glimpsed, only guessed at from a flicker in a camera built for exactly that hope. Perhaps it is real, and Venus has been thundering to itself the whole time, in a language of light too faint and too far for us to be sure of. Or perhaps it is nothing. Perhaps the flash was a trick of the instrument, and the clouds are as quiet as they are cruel, and the 40-year argument will end not with an answer, but with a shrug. As far as anyone can honestly say tonight, it could be either, and you are allowed to let it be either. You do not have to decide. You can let the question stay a question, hanging there in the dark above that world, unresolved and lovely, and let your own breathing slow beneath it. Perhaps, too, one of those mountains is awake right now, not in the way we mean when we say a thing is awake, but in the deep and geological way, the way a vent near Mart Mons seemed to shift and swell between two glances of an old radar eye, months apart, decades ago. Perhaps the lava that changed that vent is still moving. Perhaps as you lie here, somewhere on that surface a seam has opened, and something molten is climbing toward the crushing air, adding its own small heat to a world that hardly needs more. Or perhaps that eruption ended long before you were born, and the planet has gone still again, and it will be 100 years before another machine is close enough to catch the next one. We do not know. We have seen one flicker of it, a single frame of proof pulled out of pictures taken before some of you were born. And from that one flicker we know only that Venus is not finished. It is not a dead world. It is not a preserved and frozen ruin. It is a place that is still doing something, still building and breaking itself, still writing its own next line, whether or not anyone is there to read it. And perhaps, one day, someone will be. Not standing on the ground. Never on the ground. You understand that now in a way you did not a few hours ago. Understand it in your body the way you understand that fire burns and water drowns. No one will ever stand there. But high above it, at that one strange altitude where the numbers soften and the killing weight of the air thins down to something almost like home, perhaps we will float. Perhaps the drawings become real. Perhaps there will be something in that sky one day, drifting through the upper cloud, where the heat is only as fierce as a warm afternoon, and the pressure is only as heavy as the air outside your window, looking down through the haze at a surface it can never reach. Or perhaps not. Perhaps the cost is too great, and the distance too far, and it stays what it is tonight, a sketch, an idea, a beautiful and patient maybe. You are allowed to hold both. You are allowed to want it, and to know it may never come, and to feel no urgency about either, here in the quiet, with your eyes already growing heavy. That is the gift this planet gives you, if you let it. It hands you a whole shelf of things you are not required to resolve, whether the lightning is real, whether the volcano still burns, whether we will ever float above it, or ever go back at all. The going back is still only a promise, still only names and dates set years out on a calendar you may not even remember by the time they arrive. And none of it, not one thread of it, is yours to finish tonight. This is the thing worth understanding before you drift. You were never given this to solve. You were given it to witness. You were given it the way you were given the sight of a far light in the evening, not as a problem, but as a presence, something to notice and be quietly amazed by, and then let move on across the sky without you. So let the numbers go now. Let the 465 degrees go, that heat you will never feel and never need to. Let the 90 atmospheres of pressure go, that weight you will never carry. Let the acid go, and the backward turning of that long, long day, and the winds that move like slow water, and the machines that died in minutes, and sent us their last faint words from a place they could not survive. You do not have to keep any of it. You proved something to yourself just by following it this far, just by letting a mind that is trying to fall asleep still reach out across all that distance, and take the measure of a world it will never visit. That reaching is yours. The facts can leave. The reaching stays. And notice, as you let it all soften, What is happening to the fear? Because there was fear in this, wasn't there? Threaded through every movement of the night. A body crushed and cooked and unable to breathe in the same instant. A twin planet gone so wrong that nothing tender could last a heartbeat there. A warning written in heat and pressure about what a world can become when the warmth it traps runs away from it. All of that was real, and you held it, and it did not break you. It sat in you all night like a stone held in a warm hand, and now, at the end, you can feel that it was never really menace at all. It was awe wearing the mask of dread. It was the size of the universe brushing up against the smallness of you, and the strange comfort that comes when you stop resisting that difference and simply let it be true. For that is the quiet turn at the bottom of all of this, the thing the dread was hiding. Venus is not a threat to you. It cannot reach you. It has never reached anyone. It hangs out there, our nearest neighbour and our furthest thing. 465 degrees of impossibility, and it asks nothing of you at all except that you notice it exists. And you have. Tonight, drifting towards sleep on the one world in all we know of, where a body like yours can simply lie down in the dark and be safe and warm and breathing. You noticed the world where it could not. You held them both at once, the deadly one and the gentle one, the sister and the warning, and in holding them together you felt, maybe without naming it, exactly how rare and how unlikely and how quietly precious this ordinary room around you really is. That is enough. That is more than enough. You do not need to carry the planet any further than this. You can feel your shoulders letting go of it now. Feel the weight of it lifting off your chest the way that terrible air never could lift off theirs. Let your breathing slow to match the slowness of that far, patient light. Let the questions stay open above you, the lightning and the fire and the sky cities not yet built. All of them glinting softly in the dark, none of them needing you tonight. Perhaps, somewhere on that far plain right now, a seam in the rock is opening, and a slow tongue of lava is climbing toward the surface the way it may have climbed near Mons in those two radar frames taken only months apart. Or perhaps that ground has gone still again, and will stay still for 1,000 quiet years. Perhaps, high in the acid haze this very moment, a flash is blooming, 10 times brighter than any lightning you have ever watched from a bedroom window, and gone again in a few hundred milliseconds. Or perhaps it is not lightning at all, and the thing our instruments glimpsed was only light doing something we have not yet learnt the name for. Perhaps, on that plain, one of those small dead landers still rests where it fell, silent now for 50 years, its metal long since gone soft in the heat, a little monument no living thing will ever come to see. And perhaps, some evening long after tonight, a slow silver craft will hang in that one gentle layer of sky, 50 kilometers up, where the air is nearly as warm and nearly as heavy as the air in your room, and people will look down through the clouds at a world nobody can touch. Or perhaps that city will never be built, and the layer will stay empty, warm and waiting and unwitnessed, for as long as the planet keeps turning backward beneath its own long day. You do not have to decide which of these is true. That is the quiet mercy of it. The volcano will rise or it will not. Whether or not you are awake to wonder, the flash will come or it will not. The instruments still being built, the ones meant to fly out and look again in the years ahead, will find their answers or find only deeper questions, and none of that waits on you. You are allowed to set it down now. You are allowed to know only this much, and to let the rest go on happening out there in the dark without you, the way it has gone on for 4.5 billion years, patiently, without ever once needing a single human eye. Because here is the last thing, the thing that sits underneath all the others. 2 worlds began almost the same, nearly the same size, nearly the same weight, born side by side out of the same collapsing cloud, so alike that we still call them sisters. And one became a furnace under a sky of acid, 465 degrees, 92 times the weight of air, a place that kills a body in a single breath. And the other became soft grass and cool water and windows left open to the evening, became a room where you can lie down, close your eyes, and simply keep breathing without ever once thinking about the air. The line between those two fates is thinner than we like to believe, and tonight you are lying on the gentle side of it. That is not a reason to be afraid. It is the very opposite. It is the reason for the quiet astonishment you may be feeling as you sink lower into the dark. To know how easily a whole world can go wrong, and to find yourself resting on one that went right, is not a weight to carry. It is a kind of tenderness the universe rarely offers, and it is being offered to you right now, in this bed, in this breath, in this ordinary and impossible safety. Let that be the last thing you hold as you go under. Not the fear of that place, the wonder of this one. When you are ready for another of these slow walks out into the dark, Gravity of Sleep will be here, quietly keeping watch over the far and difficult things so that you do not have to. But not tonight. Tonight there is nothing left to solve and nowhere you need to be. Let your breathing slow. Let the last of the numbers dissolve. Let the planet burn on without you. Venus burns on, sunward and unreachable, faithful and terrible in its long night. While here, unburned, you close your eyes and are held.